Welcome to a special short episode of Palace Confidential, looking ahead to Her Majesty the Queen's funeral. Royal correspondent Victoria Murphy tells us a little of what we can expect on Monday.
I mean, this is going to be an incredible event, a huge state occasion, state funeral reserved only for sovereigns. There have been a couple of exceptions, but we're going to see pomp and pageantry, every display of that. We've got around 6,000 members of the military across all branches of the armed forces taking part in the processions to and from the Abbey. There's going to be around 2,000 people inside the Abbey. That's foreign dignitaries, foreign heads of state, including foreign royalty, other heads of state, representatives from all across the world, around 500 dignitaries. Also represented in the Abbey will be recipients of the Victoria Cross and the George Cross. Some of the people who received honours in the Queen's Birthday Honours List this year are also going to be there. I think the service itself will kind of really reflect all of the Queen's roles. She was head of state, head of the armed forces, supreme governor of the Church of England. Her faith was very important to her. Head of the family as well. Of course, all her family members, including her extended family, will be there, and her personal friends as well. And then head of nation, which is obviously a role that perhaps is less tangible, but a position that she had which summed up her relationship with the public. So members of the public represented, people from her patronages inside the Abbey as well. The Queen knew every single detail of the funeral. She was across all of the plans, signed everything off. I think because she was a monarch and because she did things in a very traditional, formal way, we are seeing here a really grand state occasion which ticks all of those boxes for the kind of funeral that we would expect for a head of state. There are some personal touches in there as well, particularly poignant, I think, at the end of the service. The Sovereign's Piper will close the service at Westminster Abbey, and also at St George's Chapel, the committal service as well. The Sovereign's Piper will play as her coffin is lowered into the vault. And that role of Sovereign to the Piper has been held by different people throughout the years, and many of them have spoken about the relationship that they were able to have with the Queen and how much she appreciated their role. So a very important role for that Piper. The military obviously playing a very key role. Sovereign, head of the armed forces, a role that is now, of course, immediately passed to King Charles. I think a really special moment will be when we see the coffin removed from the raised platform where it's lying in state and will be put onto the gun carriage, the state ceremonial gun carriage, and that is going to be pulled by members of the Royal Navy into Westminster Abbey and then again leaving Westminster Abbey after the service. An incredibly important role for the Royal Navy. That's a tradition that goes back to the reign of Queen Victoria to her death in 1901. But also, actually, interestingly, quite a personal touch as well, because of course Prince Philip was in the Royal Navy and the Queen early in their marriage was able to be a naval wife, and that was a moment in her life that she really cherished. So very special personally as well.
We spoke to historian and broadcaster Dr. Tessa Dunlop about the history of royal funerals.
Interestingly, Victoria was the one that decided she wanted it to be military. She said she wanted to be born as a soldier's daughter, and that's when you saw the procession, not boot out, but certainly sideline the judiciary, the lawmakers, the politicians, in preference for the armed forces. And she was also the first monarch to be taken, whose coffin was taken on a gun carriage. I believe it's the same gun carriage that they use today. Interestingly, she lay in state, but the public didn't have access to her in St George's Chapel. The first monarch to lie in state and be visited by the public was Edward VII. It was Edward VII that really dressed up royalty. And what's fascinating is his mother, Victoria, was really worried about the kind of king her son would be. He was pretty notorious and loved the women, Wouldn't go down a bomb in this era, I'm telling you that. And actually, he was a very good king, and he really nailed the theatrical. And we can't erase or pretend that the Fourth Estate, the press, doesn't have a massive role in all of this. I've been really struck by, we've talked about the queues. I think they're miles and miles long, up to 11, 12 hours now.
Yeah.
That is being driven by a media narrative on all our national channels.
Yeah.
If there isn't a sort of an event, there's going to be one. We're going to, if that makes sense, like which comes first almost. It's fascinating, and people wanting to be part of an historic occasion that is partly historic because it's going to be reflected back at us. In the 19th century, Wellington and Nelson had bigger funerals than the monarchs, and the press was just provincial, and they sold much better if they satirised the very unpopular royal family than if they wrote Jubilee edition. I think the institution of monarchy and the mass media work in parallel.
It is an interesting question, but how do you think, how important constitutionally are these kind of events, these state funerals?
Well, again, the other thing is, if you think about the beginning of the BBC in the 1920s, it was for hearts and minds, partly, wasn't it? It was to educate, the Home Service, the Empire Service. And I think it is about binding, it's about invented traditions to an extent, it's about a sense of unity. And goodness, Britain needs it. We've got 4 nations who, if you think back to the beginning of the Queen's reign, she didn't have to worry about, except in Northern Ireland, didn't have to worry about devolution and sensitive issues like whether her kingdom would stay together.
Yeah.
So this is something which we all have in common. I think the majority in all 4 nations are pro maintaining the royal family. And this is therefore something, and it's apolitical. We don't know we do know what some of its politics are, but we pretend we don't know what King Charles's politics are.
Quick reminder, make sure you subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel for more royal news over the weekend. My thanks to Dr. Tessa Dunlop, Victoria Murphy, Richard Eden, and to you for watching. We'll be back in the studio on Monday with another special episode of Palace Confidential following Her Majesty the Queen's funeral. Bye-bye.